I'm Devin, and this happened last summer. I was doing a cross-country road trip to visit some of my friends from high school. I had moved away with my family before my senior year and stayed in touch with everyone afterwards. This was over 5 years later, but I still had some good friends in my hometown. I made that trip every summer, and actually kind of enjoyed the time alone, even though it was boring sometimes. The drive was long, and I would usually make it in 2 solid days of driving. Therefore, I would have to stop to sleep once on each trip. When I was in college, I would sleep in my car to save money, but I had a job by then, so this time, I was planning to get a hotel room on the way. I had seen some places on the way so far, but it was too early. Once the sun went down, I was ready to call it a night. There was a small town along the highway coming up, and I thought it looked good enough. As I drove through the town, I saw that it was barely more than a stop on the highway. On the way in, I saw a gas station, and across the street, there was a McDonald's. I made a mental note that it was there, because I was getting hungry. There was only one motel, but that was all I needed. I pulled into the parking lot and checked in. The room was decent, it was basic but clean, and I was glad to have a place for the night. After taking a quick shower, I started getting ready to head out for some food. I remembered seeing that McDonald's on the way in, so I decided to go there, since it would probably be the quickest. By that time, it was getting really dark, and I didn't want to waste any more time than I needed to. The town was quiet as I walked, and I didn't see many people around. It was a real ghost town at night. I wondered where everyone was, but it kind of made sense because there was not much to do there. It really wasn't much more than a truck stop. I was walking along the side of the road on the grass because there was no sidewalk. It was clear that the place was not designed for walking. The McDonald's was easy to find, and I hoped it would be open despite the late hour. The neon sign on the outside was on, but I think they leave those on all the time anyway. I noticed that the parking lot was mostly empty, which seemed odd for a place like this, even at night. I walked across the small parking lot and noticed only one other car was there. However, around the side of the building, I could see that there was another car around the back where there were some garbage dumpsters. I could just see the back third of it, but I didn't go back to get a better look. As I got closer, the place looked closed, with no lights on inside. I still walked up to the door, hoping it might be open. Through the glass, I could see a single man inside. He was behind the counter, but everything seemed oddly empty. I tried the handle on the door. It jiggled a little, but I couldn't get it all the way open. It was opening a little bit, almost enough that I could probably squeeze through if I really tried, but there was something keeping it closed. I took out my phone for some extra light and shone it at the door. I could see something weird on the other side. The handles on the inside were tied shut with something. It looked like it could be some kind of strap holding the 2 handles shut on the other side of the door, or it could have just been a lot of duct tape. The next time I looked up, I couldn't see anybody there. There was definitely somebody inside before, but now he was gone. The place really did look closed, and I had lost any hope of making an order. Deciding it was best not to stick around, I left and headed back to the motel. There was that gas station across the road though, so I went inside and picked up some snacks and then took them back to the motel room. I wondered if I should have done something more, but I was too tired to dwell on it. Besides, I thought they were just closing up, and I explained the weird door somehow. Back at the motel, I tried to distract myself with some TV, and eventually, I fell asleep in my room. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to get back on the road. I packed my things and checked out of the motel. As I drove past the McDonald's on my way out of town, I saw that something terrible had happened. The building was blown apart, with shattered glass everywhere all over the parking lot. Police and emergency vehicles were all over the place. I pulled over and got out of my car, watching the scene from a distance. It was clear that there had been some kind of explosion. I remembered the man from the night before, and wondered if that had something to do with it. I called the police to tell them what I had seen the previous night. I told them that I was close by and willing to talk if they needed me. They sent an officer over, and we talked for about 5 or 10 minutes. It didn't seem like they were that interested in my account. Maybe they had enough already and knew what happened. There was that gas station across the road, and there were probably cameras there, so my experience may not have been needed. After I was done with the police, I took one more look at the charred shell of that restaurant, and I got back into my car. As I drove away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. The image of that destroyed McDonald's was a real sight. I stopped at a gas station a few miles down the road to grab a quick breakfast. Then I got back onto the road before 10 in the morning. The rest of the day was just driving, and of course, I was thinking about what could have happened to that place. When I got to my friend's place late that night, I told the story right away. He suggested that it could be some kind of insurance scam. I've heard that people will sometimes blow up a business that they own just to collect the insurance money. Since McDonald's is a franchise, and the restaurants all have individual owners, that seemed possible. It wouldn't explain the strange way the door was locked, though. If that was the owner, then why wouldn't he just lock the door? Even though I kept an eye on the news in the area, I never found out for sure what happened out there. One of my friends thinks somebody must have been hurt or worse in the explosion, and that's why the police weren't telling the public. As for me, I'm just glad that I didn't show up when the explosion happened. I worked at McDonald's when I was in high school, and something crazy happened to me when I was there. It was my senior year, and I had been working there for about 6 months. It was all night shifts for me because of school. Our location was open till midnight, so there were some late nights for me, especially since I took 2 weekday shifts every week. It was close to my high school, which was in the busier part of the city. There were a lot of apartment buildings and other businesses around, so lots of people coming in earlier in the evening. I lived out in the country with my parents, and it was about a 25-minute drive. I had my car by then, so that wasn't so bad. I was there one evening with my coworker Jill. Jill was in her late 20s. She had been working there for a long time. She was the assistant manager, and she was technically in charge. It was a Tuesday, and it was pretty busy when I got there at 7 p.m. As the hours went by, though, it quieted down significantly. There were a few groups scattered around in the dining area, but it had been a while since anybody ordered anything. They were mostly just hanging around, using the Wi-Fi. I was standing at the front counter, wiping it down and tidying things up for close. We were pretty much set to get out of there on time, and in a while, I was planning to go around and tell everyone that we were closing, although I wasn't really supposed to kick them out until midnight. As I was standing there, one of our remaining customers, a middle-aged woman, approached me and said that there was somebody passed out in the far corner of the dining room, next to the bathroom. I walked over and saw a man slumped over a table, his head resting on his folded arms. At first, I thought he might be passed out drunk. I called Jill over and pointed to him. She shrugged and said that we should probably check on him. It wasn't that uncommon for people to fall asleep, but we had to make sure that he was okay, especially since we were closing soon. It wasn't my place to help people like that, but I thought we should at least try to wake him up before calling the cops. I walked over to the man, trying not to startle him. I stood there for a few seconds, then tried talking to him, but he didn't respond, so I tapped him gently on the shoulder, told him we were closing soon. He didn't move, just sat there with his head down. I called out to him again, a little louder this time, but there was still no reaction. I felt a knot in my stomach as the man remained still. Jill came over to see what was going on. She went up to him and leaned in closer. "Sir, we're closing in a few minutes. You need to get up." He still didn't move, and then Jill walked away but didn't say anything to me. Knowing her, I thought she was about to call the police. She had a real no-nonsense type of personality, and I'm surprised she even gave him the chance that she did. I was still standing there in front of the man, and I reached out and shook his shoulder a bit more firmly this time. His head lifted slightly, but he didn't look up. His face was still hidden in his arms, making it hard to see his expression. I noticed that he was breathing, which was a relief, but he still wasn't reacting to me in a meaningful way. By then, it was nearly midnight, and the remaining customers had left. Jill and I were alone with this unresponsive man. I turned to look around the corner to where the counter was. I could see Jill with the phone pressed up to her ear. Thinking that would be the end of it, I started walking over. That was when I heard the man move. I turned around and noticed that he was getting up. Just then, I realized that he was holding a knife. Before I could get away, the man came at me with the knife. I stumbled back trying to put some distance between us, but I tripped over one of the other tables. Stumbling back, I tried to keep on my feet, but I fell over and slammed my knee on the ground. I sprung right back up and then scrambled back. The man was still walking towards me. I ran back to the counter and jumped over it. As soon as Jill saw me, she gave me this disgusted look, like I was messing around. But when she saw the man with the knife, she understood immediately. We both ran to the back and into one of the storage rooms. The door didn't even have a lock, but we both held it closed. Jill told me that she already called the cops, but at the time, it wasn't reported as an emergency, so we didn't know how long it would take. She called when we thought he was just passed out, so she used the non-emergency number. I wanted to call again, but before we had time, I heard the man coming. He was on the other side of the door, but on our side of the counter. We still didn't know what his problem was, but Jill said that he was probably on drugs. We stood there for minutes, holding the door tightly. We could hear the man on the other side, but he never tried to open the door. We heard things smashing and some weird grunting noises, but luckily, he didn't try to get us. It sounded like he was trashing the place, or maybe trying to get into the register. Once I was sure he wasn't coming for us, I told Jill to call the cops again while I covered the door. She took out her phone and dialed 911. This time she told them it was an emergency and that we were stuck in a closet. It seemed like forever, but the cops did eventually show up. We could hear as they arrested the guy, and then we came out. As soon as I stepped out of that closet, I saw what he did to the place. It was a mess. There was some stuff scattered on the floor, and then I noticed the screens for our checkout. There were a few slash marks on them that must have been made by the knife. There was no obvious reason for any of that. It was just senseless damage. It didn't look like he tried to steal anything or get into the registers. Those things are pretty much impossible to break into anyway, but he probably didn't know that. Jill did most of the talking to the cops, and I waited off to the side. When they were done, she filled me in before we left for the night. The guy was obviously arrested, and they did think he was on some hard drugs that night. I went home, and when I got back to my house, my dad was still up. That was good, because I really wanted to talk to somebody before going to bed. We sat in the living room for about an hour. He told me that if I wanted to quit, then he wouldn't be mad. I decided not to, because I wasn't really that scared after thinking about it. I kept working there until I went away for college. The creepy thing is that for the rest of the time that I was working there, they never got the register screens fixed. They still worked with the scratch from the knife, so they never bothered replacing them. Every time I put in an order, I was reminded of that night. This all happened about 5 years ago, just before the world went crazy. I was still living in a big city back then, but I've moved since. I had an apartment with one of my best friends, Andrew, and life was pretty good for the most part. I was doing freelance graphic design, and also delivering for Uber on the side. I was 23, so I was doing alright for my age. Some of my friends were still in college, so we would go out a few times a week. There were some bars around our place, and I was definitely a regular at more than one of them. Me and the guys went out one Thursday night, and stayed until after midnight. On the walk home, I decided to stop at McDonald's to get some food. I was the only one that was hungry, so everybody else went home. It was just a few blocks out of the way, so a few minutes after I split off from the guys, I was there. As soon as I walked in the front door, I noticed something. There was a man arguing with one of the cashiers. He was loud, and he seemed angry. I didn't see what happened, but it was probably just some mistake with his order. I had been to this place late before, and there were some creepy people there late at night. This guy didn't seem like one of them, though. He seemed like just a normal guy around my age. He was angry and yelling, so there's that. The cashier looked scared, but he was trying to stay calm and defuse the situation. I stayed near the entrance, keeping a safe distance. I didn't want to get involved, but I couldn't help but watch. There were a few other customers in there, but everyone was kind of doing the same thing as me, watching from a distance, not wanting to get involved. I'm not sure exactly how long this went on for, but it must have been at least 2 or 3 minutes from when I came in. Then the man jumped over the counter and lunged at the cashier. The worker tried to defend himself, but he was probably caught off guard. They both dropped to the ground behind the counter, out of my sight. I could hear them struggling, but I didn't know for sure what was happening. I probably should have done something, maybe called for help, but to be honest, I was kind of a deer in the headlights, and I didn't know what to do at the time. Everyone likes to think that they'd be some brave hero, but few actually would. After probably less than 10 seconds, I saw the worker get away. The back of his head was just above the counter as he ran away. I knew it was him because all the workers wore hats there. I could hear more commotion from the back, probably the workers trying to call for help. Then something happened that made my blood run cold. The man behind the counter stood up and turned towards me. That's when I saw that he was holding a gun. Since I was still next to the front entrance, I backed out and made my way towards the parking lot, trying not to draw any attention to myself. There were still a few other people in there, so I was concerned for them, but I hid behind a wall just to make sure I was out of firing range. Then the police pulled up. I raised my hands just in case they thought I was the gunman, but they went right past me. Once the cops were inside, I could hear the man yelling. It was self-defense. I was just trying to protect myself. The tension was unbearable as I waited at the front of the building. I didn't know at the time if I was allowed to leave, because I was probably going to be a witness. Minutes later, the police dragged the guy out and put him into one of the cars. I gave a quick interview with one of the cops, but many other people had seen the whole thing just like me. After that, I was free to go, so I went straight home, not bothering to get any food. The next morning, I passed that McDonald's, and to my surprise, it was open just like always. I couldn't believe that they didn't even close it for a single day after something like that happened. I guess nobody was hurt, but it was close. I understand that life has to go on eventually, but still, it was a shock. I'm Gina, and this happened to me over the last year or so, and a friend of mine was around for most of it. We'll call her Anna. Anna and I were friends from high school. We weren't super close back then, but when I moved away for college, she was the only one who went to the same place as me. We were roommates in our first year, but she dropped out partway through. Not because she wasn't smart enough, but because it was too expensive and she needed a way to support herself. She started working at a McDonald's in our city. She never went back to our hometown because of some family issues that I won't get into. So in the summer after our first year, she was working full-time while I was looking for work. She managed to get me in on a part-time basis, so I was working there too. I was still applying for other jobs that were more relevant to my field of study, but it was good to have something. It wasn't the most exciting job, and it didn't even cover my bills. Some of you will know how expensive school can be. I wasn't paying Ivy League tuition or anything, but it was still more than a fast food wage could cover. My shifts were usually pretty routine once I was done with training. I had never worked in high school, so this was actually my first job. The people I worked with were nice, including Anna, and we got along well enough to make the time pass quickly. One Tuesday afternoon, it was slow, and I was at the register watching the clock. At around 2 in the afternoon, a man walked in. He looked to be in his late 30s, dressed in business casual clothes. Maybe he was on a lunch break from work. He came up to the counter and smiled. I greeted him and asked what he'd like to order. He seemed friendly and made some small talk while I took his order. When I did, he paid with a credit card. Nothing wrong so far. I handed him his receipt and told him it would be ready shortly. Instead of moving aside to wait, he stayed at the counter and started asking me questions. At first it was just casual stuff. I think he even mentioned the weather at one point. But then he began getting more personal. Anna was in the back at the time, and there was one other coworker there, but he was somewhere else too, so I was the only one up there. I was giving him brief, polite answers, hoping he would take the hint and move on. Instead, he kept going. He asked if I was in school, what I studied, and even what part of town I lived in. I tried to keep my answers vague, not wanting to share too much with a stranger. I told him I was just working there to save some money, and left it at that. He wasn't doing anything that bad, but there was a vibe that he was giving off. He was getting uncomfortable. I glanced around, hoping Anna would come over, but she must not have noticed that I was uncomfortable. She would have been able to see me from the back, though. I did my best to stay professional, and didn't call anything out. Finally, his order was ready. I handed him the tray and told him to have a nice day. He thanked me and then went to sit down. I let out a small sigh of relief and tried to shake off the weird feeling. About an hour later, I went out for my break. I stepped outside to get some fresh air and check my phone. I sat at one of the outdoor tables, and as I was scrolling through my messages, I looked up and saw the man walking towards me. He sat down right across from me and tried to strike up another conversation. At one point, he even asked for my number, but I was smart enough not to give it to him. When I said no, he got angry, but didn't say another word to me. I could see it in his face that he was mad, and I was scared. He clenched his fist in front of me and pounded the table. I jumped back when he did, and then Anna came out to check on me. I was never so happy to see her. As soon as she started coming towards us, the man took off. She joined me at the table for just a minute because she had to get back to work, but I told her quickly what happened. She told me that he would come in a few times per week, and he gave her a bad vibe too, so it wasn't just me. That night after I got home from work, I was tired, so I went straight to my room. One of my roommates had some friends over, but I was too tired to hang out. When I was in bed watching something on my laptop, my phone began ringing. I looked over at the caller ID, and it was a number that I didn't know. Normally I wouldn't answer, but I had been applying for other jobs, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing anything. When I picked it up, it was a man's voice that I didn't recognize right away. He asked for me by my full name, and I tentatively said that it was me. Then he asked me how the rest of my shift was. That's when I realized who was on the phone. I had no idea how he got my number, or how he knew my full name. I hung up right away and then called Anna. We talked for almost an hour, and by the end of it, I had calmed down a lot. I blocked the number and then went to bed. The next morning, I had many missed calls from other numbers, and I'm pretty sure they were all him. If he knew my name and number, then I was scared that he knew where I lived too. Luckily, my building had pretty good security, and I had roommates. The next time I went into work, I was scared that I would see him, but that didn't happen on my next shift. The shift after that, though, I was behind the counter as usual, and the guy walked right in. This time he didn't order anything. He didn't even come to the counter or try to talk to me. He just paced back and forth on the far end of the room, looking over at me occasionally, then he left. When I was done with my shift that evening, I took the bus back to my apartment. I was worried that he would follow me, but he was definitely not on the bus. There were only a few other people, and none of them were him. However, when I got off at my stop, I noticed a car on the road moving slowly behind me. I was feeling paranoid, but I still think it was him, even though I never got a clear look. After another month, I found a different job, and I was able to quit the one at McDonald's. In all that time, I was getting at least a few calls per day from a random number, and I think it was that guy. I did call the police, even though I didn't have that much. Most of my friends said that I should report it, and my mom agreed. They didn't arrest him or anything, but the calls have stopped, and I haven't seen him in a few weeks. I don't think I'm in the clear yet, but I hope this is the end of it.